Fools. They thought you were the sheep, the disposable one, the quiet one who'd break at the first scream, scatter at the first storm, surrender at the first slap of life. But they didn't know. Oh, they didn't know. Because beneath your silence was something ancient, something savage. They thought the absence of your roar was weakness, but it was patience. It was calculation. And now, they watch in horror as the one they once mocked rises with a vengeance so methodical, so merciless. It rewrites the meaning of fear itself. You weren't just underestimated. You were buried under their labels, stomped by their arrogance, and dismissed like a forgotten shadow. But shadows remember. Shadows evolve. And when the time is right, shadows become storms. You didn't snap. You transformed. You walked through their ridicule, their betrayal, their backhanded compliments and fake smiles, until your bones knew the language of pain better than peace. And then you wrote your own war, line by bloody line. They couldn't smell the fire cooking behind your stitched lips. They couldn't see the monsters you were building in silence, because you gave them what they expected: a quiet nod, an agreeable shrug, a fragile yes. But inside, you were documenting every insult, every betrayal, every dismissal. You didn't forgive. You filed. You archived every slight into a dark library of rage. And one day, the shelves cracked open. Not with screams, not with fists, but with moves they couldn't predict, from a mind they couldn't read, wearing a face they thought they owned. But no, you reclaimed it, piece by piece, expression by expression, until the mirror reflected not their puppet, but your revenge. And when you made your move, when you pulled off the unthinkable, it wasn't desperation, it was design. You didn't explode, you executed. They thought your silence was surrender, it was surveillance. They thought your kindness was obedience, it was observation. You watched them betray you with politeness, sabotage you with a smile, and gossip your name into dust. But you said nothing. You didn't need to, because you were building a chessboard while they were dancing in circles, drunk on their own ego. You built it with precision, and when the pieces were ready, oh, when the pieces were ready, you moved like a ghost that forgot how to die. No warning, no mercy. You didn't just shock them, you shattered them. You took the very thing they used against you, your supposed weakness, and turned it into a blade. A blade so sharp, it slit through their pride without even touching skin. And when they bled, they didn't bleed red. They bled regret. You didn't rise loud. You rose like a curse, unspoken, unseen, but undeniable. And now they whisper your name in circles they once locked you out of. Their laughter has gone quiet. Their words tremble like faulty prayers. Because you did what no one saw coming. You didn't fight back with fists. You fought back with evolution. You became something terrifying, something poetic, the kind of force that doesn't ask for respect. It takes it. You stopped playing their game and built your own arena. And in that arena, the rules are yours. The tempo is yours. The outcome? Always yours. They trained you to bend. You trained yourself to bend the world. They tried to break you in private, but now they watch you dominate in public. And it haunts them. Because this isn't just revenge. This is revelation. You didn't become who they expected. You became what they feared. You started as a whisper, a background extra in their scripted lives. And now you're the plot twist that ends their act. The silence that crushes their noise. They built you out of cruelty. They mocked you like a joke. But now, the punchline is theirs to swallow. and it tastes like ash. You didn't need revenge handed to you on a plate. You cooked it yourself, slow roasted in long nights and longer memories. And when it was done, you served it cold. Cold enough to make their hearts freeze. Cold enough to make their lungs forget how to breathe when they see what you've become. They thought they knew you, but all they ever saw was the decoy, the bait, the facade. What stands before them now isn't the version they wounded. It's the version those wounds created. And that version doesn't blink, doesn't beg, doesn't break. You didn't roar into the room. You changed the temperature. Suddenly, their comfort turned to confusion. Their superiority turned to stuttering. They don't know how to talk to you anymore. Because the old version, the one they thought was pliable, is dead, buried beneath their own ego. And what rose in its place? It's not just stronger, it's smarter, colder, sharper. You turned their betrayal into architecture, their doubt into fuel, their dismissal into art. And now the gallery of your wrath is open. No tickets, just consequences. You don't chase them, you haunt them. You live in their pauses. You echo in their second thoughts. You own their unease. They don't say your name aloud anymore, because it tastes like accountability. And accountability has teeth. They thought they'd destroyed you, but you were never fragile. You were feral, just disguised. They thought you'd crawl away. You learned to claw through stone. They thought they won, but they didn't know the game had just begun. Because when the so-called weak rise, they rise with a ledger, not of debts owed to them, but of vengeance owed to fate. And now fate is knocking, and it's wearing your grin. They prayed you'd stay broken, but broken bones heal harder. Broken hearts burn longer, and broken souls, those become something else entirely. Something they were never prepared for. You're not the phoenix. That story's too clean, too beautiful. You're the wildfire after the world turns its back, the earthquake under their fake foundations, the silence before their storm. This isn't about proving them wrong anymore. This is about erasing their relevance. They don't get to be part of your rise. Their opinions, their validation, their apologies, they're not currency anymore. They're clutter. You don't want closure. You want dominance. And dominance isn't given. It's carved. With blood. With patience. With every step you take that makes their stomachs drop and their masks crumble. They can't look at you the same anymore. Not because you changed, but because you finally showed them what was always there. You didn't switch up. You unleashed. And now, they flinch at the very presence they used to mock. They fear the shadow that used to trail behind them, because that shadow now walks ahead, unchained, unapologetic, unforgiving. And what comes next? Oh, what comes next will silence whatever is left of their arrogance. They couldn't escape it. The very air had shifted. The walls, once secure, now felt like they were closing in. Every step they took, they felt the weight of their own lies pressing down on them. And it wasn't just the weight of guilt. It was something darker, something they couldn't name. They had underestimated you, yes, but now they were beginning to realize the depth of their error. They thought they could manipulate the narrative. They thought they could write your story, tie it with strings of humiliation, strip it of purpose, and make you fade into the background, the forgotten one. But now, they watched you, standing in the spotlight of your own making, your shadow stretching farther than they ever thought possible. You didn't just rise, you rewrote the rules. Every act of cruelty they once thought had broken you had instead fused into something so unforgiving that it could never be undone. The facade of weakness they painted on you was now a grotesque mask they had to wear themselves, because every time they saw you, they saw their own deception. It wasn't just about what you had done, it was about what you had become, a creature of resilience, of fury, and yes, of grace, because that's the cruelest part of your revenge. It's not just the raw, burning pain that you deliver. It's the fact that you do it with elegance, with a quiet, almost terrifying certainty. You're not a beast that tears through the fabric of reality with no purpose. No, you are the storm that they never saw coming, but once it hits, it's too late to find shelter. Every person who laughed at you, who ridiculed your patience, now feels the sting of their own complacency. You didn't beg for mercy. You didn't scream for attention. You simply waited. And in that waiting, you turned your suffering into something stronger, something more lethal. They thought you'd be a footnote in their story, a casualty of their ambition. But you weren't just a casualty. You were the turning point, the moment when their carefully constructed lives started crumbling, brick by brick. They had convinced themselves that you were nothing but a passing phase. But phases come and go. And you? You were the eclipse, blotting out the sun and leaving them in a world of darkness that they had never known. It wasn't just about the moment of revenge. It was about how you'd done it, how you turned their expectations upside down and made them question every false assumption they ever had about you. You'd made your move in silence. You didn't need the dramatic entrance. You didn't need the loud, raucous declarations of war. Your power didn't reside in the things you shouted. Your power was in the things you didn't say, in the things you didn't do. They thought you were weak because you chose the quiet route. You didn't fight back with fists, with sharp words or desperate pleas. You fought with something far more dangerous, your mind. You waited for the perfect moment to strike, and when it came, they couldn't even see it happening. It wasn't the explosion they had imagined. It was the collapse of everything they had built on your brokenness. You had taken the rubble of their cruelty, the ashes of their disdain, and built a monument to your own rise. A monument that with every passing second felt more and more like a tombstone for their pride. They thought the world was theirs to manipulate. They thought their power was absolute. But they forgot something crucial, something no one should ever forget. You are never as untouchable as you think you are. Not when someone is willing to endure. Not when someone can survive the worst of the storm and use it to fuel their own fire. They had created their own gods in their image, ruling over others with their cruelty and arrogance. But they forgot that gods can fall. And fall, they did. You didn't play by their rules. The moment they thought they had you figured out, you shifted the game entirely. You weren't their puppet. You were their reckoning. And now, they watched as you reaped the benefits of your patience, something they had never understood. Your rise wasn't one of sudden explosion, one that left them breathless and afraid of what you could do. No, your rise was a quiet vengeance. It was the slow, creeping realization that everything they had built was starting to erode. The walls they built to shield themselves from consequences started to crack, piece by piece, and with each crack, you revealed your true power. You didn't need their validation. You didn't need their approval. What you needed was to show them that their arrogance had a price, and now they were paying it. They had always believed that time was on their side. Time was the great equalizer, the thing that would let their actions fade into the past, forgotten and forgiven. But that was their first mistake. Time doesn't heal all wounds. Time doesn't cover up everything. In your case, time was your weapon, your ally, your silence that ate away at them until there was nothing left but the truth. You weren't weak. You had only been waiting for the right moment to show them what you were truly capable of. And that moment arrived. It arrived with a suddenness they couldn't fathom, with the kind of unrelenting force that left them gasping for air, scrambling to hold on to the remains of their carefully constructed lives. They thought you were nothing but a victim, easy to overlook, easy to dismiss. But they underestimated the strength of your resolve. They thought they had crushed your spirit. But the truth was that you were never broken. You were simply forged. You were made stronger, tougher, more dangerous. And now, they were staring at the result of that transformation, powerless to stop it. What they didn't understand is that you weren't seeking revenge for yourself. No, you were seeking justice, the kind of justice that had been denied to you for far too long. You were righting the wrongs they thought they could get away with. You were tearing apart the illusions they had spun around themselves, one truth at a time. And they couldn't even see it until it was too late. By the time they realized what was happening, you had already moved beyond them. They were left behind, scrambling to catch up, trapped in the consequences of their own arrogance. Now, they could only watch as you took what was rightfully yours. They could only stand by as you dismantled everything they had worked so hard to build, because all they had built was based on lies, on manipulation, on the false assumption that you would remain small. But the truth is this: they never stood a chance, not against someone like you. And now, with each passing second, the power you had reclaimed grew stronger. It became clear that you weren't just taking back what they had stolen from you. No, you were taking their very foundation, shaking it until the ground beneath them was nothing but dust. The more they tried to fight back, the more they realized that the battle was already lost. They never stood a chance against someone who could rise from the ashes of their torment, someone who could turn the very things meant to break them into the tools of their own destruction. They thought you were weak. They thought you were nothing. But now, the truth stood before them, undeniable and unyielding. You were their worst nightmare, and there was nothing they could do to stop you. And then came the moment of reckoning. The silence in the air was deafening, filled with the weight of inevitability. They thought they had you cornered, thought they could control the narrative. But now they stood in the ruins of their own design. Every word they spoke, every move they made, only dug them deeper into the hole they had unknowingly crafted for themselves. What they had failed to realize was that you weren't some fleeting shadow that would evaporate with the first sign of light. No, you were the storm, and the storm doesn't beg for permission to rage. It simply unleashes. The truth had unfolded before them like a slow, inevitable collapse of everything they believed in. and they could no longer deny it. The illusions were shattered. The walls they had built were crumbling to dust, and with every grain that fell, you became more formidable, more untouchable. They were desperate now, scrambling for any semblance of control, clinging to any last shred of power they could grasp. But it was too late. You had already taken it all, not through force, not through violence, but through the simple, unrelenting truth of your existence. You were the embodiment of what they never expected. They had plotted and schemed, laughing in the shadows, thinking you would never rise. But in their overconfidence, they had forgotten something fundamental. You had nothing to lose, nothing left to break. And that made you infinitely more dangerous than they could ever understand. They were playing a game with rules they never thought you would even know. But you didn't just play their game, you redefined it. The tables had turned, and now they were the ones left powerless in your wake. They scrambled to find a way to regain their footing, to turn the tide in their favor. But all their efforts were futile. You weren't interested in revenge. No, revenge was an amateur's game. What you wanted, what you were destined for, was something much grander. You were here to punish. You were here to make them see what they had failed to see all along, the consequences of their own actions. And they were going to feel it, every single moment, every whisper of their deceit, every shadow they had cast over you. They were going to feel it tenfold. They tried to fight back, of course. There were the half-hearted attempts to manipulate the story, to twist the narrative so they could somehow regain control. But those were desperate moves, clumsy and uncoordinated. The truth had already been exposed, and there was no hiding from it now. The moment they thought you were weak, you had become their reckoning. The moment they thought you had fallen, you had risen. Not as a shadow, not as a victim, but as a force that could not be contained. The irony, the absolute poetic irony, was that they had made you into this. They had underestimated your strength, your patience, your ability to endure. And in doing so, they had given you everything you needed to tear down the very empire they had built on your suffering. You didn't need to destroy them with a single blow. No. You had built your revenge over time. Each calculated move, each moment of silence, each rejection of their cruelty, slowly building until it became an unstoppable wave of retribution. It wasn't the loud, dramatic clash they expected. It wasn't the fire and fury they had so often used to destroy others. It was the quiet, inevitable collapse that came when the foundation crumbled. And now, they were left with nothing. The walls they built to protect their pride, their arrogance, their power, were nothing but rubble. And the weight of their own actions pressed down on them like a tomb. There was no escape now. No way out of the chaos they had created. They had thought you were weak. They had thought that you would fold under pressure, disappear into the shadows, be forgotten. But they were wrong. The shadows had become your domain, and now they were the ones cast in darkness. You had done the unthinkable, but not for the reasons they assumed. You had risen, not because you wanted to prove a point, but because you were never meant to be anything less than what you were. A force to be reckoned with. The cruelty they had imposed upon you had been their undoing. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. It was about making the scales tip back in your favor, bringing the world to a reckoning. one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They had dared to play a game they couldn't understand, and now they would be the ones trapped in its consequences. As they looked around, seeing the chaos they had caused for themselves, there was no denying the truth any longer. They had underestimated you, yes. But more than that, they had underestimated what you had become. They thought they were the ones pulling the strings, manipulating everyone around them, including you. But they had never known that you were the one who had learned how to pull the strings of fate. They had never understood that you were the one who could turn their own poison against them. They thought you were weak, and they thought they could use that weakness to their advantage. But now, the world they had once controlled was slipping through their fingers like sand, and you were standing at the center of it, untouchable, unbroken. They had thought they could break you, but in the end, they had only made you into something far more terrifying than they ever could have imagined. And now, as they watched everything they had built begin to collapse, the only thing they could do was face the consequences of their own arrogance. You had done the unthinkable, but it wasn't for glory. It wasn't for power. It was simply because you had become something else. Something that could no longer be manipulated. Something that could no longer be controlled. And in their final moments, as they faced the truth of your rise, they realized the terrifying reality of it all. They were never the masters of the game. They were always just pawns in yours. And as the dust settled, as the echoes of their screams faded into nothingness, there was no denying the bitter truth that would haunt them for the rest of their days. They had thought you were weak, but now they knew the real truth. The weak don't rise. The broken don't come back. The undone don't strike with such precision. No, it wasn't your weakness that made them tremble. It was the sheer, unrelenting strength of your resolve, the strength they never saw coming. And now, it was too late for them. Too late to run. Too late to hide. You had done the unthinkable, and in doing so, you had become the unthinkable. And in their final moments of defeat, they understood. They had never been playing against you. They had been playing against fate itself.